Welcome to the Raise Your Energy podcast. My name is Lange and I'm your podcast host. And today we are again in our format of the coffee chat. I'd rather have some water with me today because it's pretty warm outside, but I think that's okay. And this episode is so special to me because it is the first birthday of our podcast. Congratulations, podcast. It is the first birthday. It's 1 year since I started the Raise Your Energy podcast. And this episode is all going to be about how I started, why I'm having the podcast. I will share with you some mistakes that I make, which I don't want you to make if you're thinking of creating a podcast. And then what have I learned and what is going to come in the future. So all about celebrating the Raise Your Energy podcast. Stay tuned. Happy birthday, dear podcast. I am so grateful that I have you in my life, and I hope we're gonna spend many more years together on great adventures. Thank you so much for having me. I love you very much. So this was my birthday message to my own podcast. I know that sounds a bit crazy, but it had to be done. So I feel truly blessed that I'm already 1 year in having my own podcast. And why did I even start that podcast? Well, I started probably about 1.5 years ago to be more visible about energy and self-development on social media. So I did posts and I did maybe on Instagram some stories, and I even did already some little videos on YouTube. But the format was just not long enough for me. I wanted to go deeper and really get to the root of some issues and really share as well my experiences and my learnings in so much more detail so you can actually take it and straight away implement it. So that's when I decided to start a podcast 1 year ago. Crazy to say it out loud. So I started with a podcast, and if you're already a long time listener or watcher now on YouTube, then you know that at the beginning, the first 6 months, this was just a podcast. So there was no video. But then when I came back from a couple of my retreats in January, I decided to step out of my comfort zone and actually turn as well the camera on. So since then, the podcast is as well available on YouTube as a video, which later on will actually be quite exciting. I'm not going to share it already now, what is going to happen. But yeah, that's where we are now. And I'm just so excited to talk all about the podcast today, share my insights, my learnings, and my tips for you if you are actually interested in creating a podcast yourself as well, which would be super exciting. I can tell you it's so worth it. So do it. So that's a little bit about the history and how I started 12 months ago. But now let me share my 3 biggest takeaways that I have from having and running a podcast. Number 1 is it's kind of my own therapy, if I can say so. A lot of the time I talk about topics that I'm literally just going through. Maybe very much at that time that I go through these topics, or I have just kind of closed them off. But going through the process of writing the script, recording myself, creating, of course, with my podcast manager, Sarah, all the social media content really helps me to reflect on my own journey and digest the material and the words one more time in a bit of a different way. It just gives me another different perspective. So I kind of see some of the topics really help me to process something in a better way, or close it off and put a line underneath it because I have worked on it and now I can kind of let it go and share my learnings and my own journey with you. So that's number one. It's kind of like my own therapy to talk to you here on the camera. Number two is that the podcast really helps me to learn certain topics. It helps me to learn and to grow mentally and to grow more knowledge and information inside of me. So let me explain what that means. I sometimes come across topics, either a follower told me to cover this topic, a friend, or Sarah, our podcast manager, or even my husband. I get my ideas for the podcast from anywhere and I collect them. And sometimes I come across topics where I don't know the exact answer to this. I cannot just go and just write the script from top to bottom out. I don't have all the information that I need for it yet. And I don't have my own words for that topic yet completely straight in my head. So what I do at that point is that I sit myself down and I research. I read articles, or I even go and look into books where I know I find some more information on it. Sometimes I have training materials from previous qualifications or courses that I bought in the past, and I go back and see what that person is saying about it, because I know it stuck with my mind when I heard them say it for the first time. So I investigate, I explore, and I collect more information that I can build into that podcast episode. And then I get my words straight. I, of course, tell you all about it in my own words. But that way, next time when somebody's asking me, I can actually talk about it quite eloquently and like I know my stuff. So it's really, really good from a learning perspective and getting my thoughts straight in my head on topics that you actually want to hear about. So thank you for all your suggestions that I received in the past, and I'm looking forward to receiving more. So let me know in the reviews, wherever you're listening to this, or underneath the video on YouTube, what do you want to hear me talk about? What is close to your heart? What do you want to learn more about? And I'm going to make sure to build it into the podcast. So number 3 of my 3 takeaways is a little bit more a personal topic, something that I'm working on. And that is about the consistency of running this podcast. Let me explain what I mean by that. A production of a podcast takes a lot of consistency. You do have to produce either an episode every week as you go and publish them, or sometimes if you have plans or you have projects going on, or like me in the last 6 months, I traveled a lot. I have to produce even 2 or 3 episodes per week because then I want to take some time off. So the podcast in itself, having a podcast and running the podcast, gives me the opportunity of creating content and something for my business every single week or very consistently. And why this is important for me is my whole life, I always had this need of learning something new, and I get very quickly bored of new hobbies, new topics, or in the past when I was still employed, I got very quickly bored of jobs. Yes. And I discovered in the last few months that this is just one of the programs that I'm running, and that I don't have to always live to this one program. If I want to master something and actually stick with something, I have that choice as well. I don't have to just always live this one personality trait of wanting to always move on to the next shiny thing. You know what I mean? So the podcast really gives me the opportunity to become a master in my own podcast. It always helps me to refine what we're doing, making something better. And that is, for example, the equipment that I'm using or the softwares that we're using to produce all the content, or where we're gonna talk more about the podcast. And now very soon we're getting a lot of more guests on the podcast. So I actually take steps now to become really a master of having my own podcast and how I really want to excel in having this podcast, the Raise Your Energy podcast. So that's my third takeaway, to really be consistent in something. And through that consistency, I can actually create mastery, which is something fairly kind of new to me, to really stick with something for such a long time that I can call myself a master. So I like that new side of me. I like that new personality trait. So these were my 3 takeaways that I wanted to share with you first. So let's talk about how the podcast actually gets created. So what are the steps you want to take, or that I take, to actually get this over to you, for you to listen to it now or for you to watch it now? But before I dive into the details, let me actually introduce somebody to you. This show, this podcast would actually not happen if it wouldn't be for my amazing podcast manager, Sarah. And I'm actually going to take the opportunity to let her introduce herself to you. So over to you, Sarah, and share your lovely face and voice with everybody.
Hey everyone, happy birthday to the podcast. Thank you, Linda, for the lovely introduction. I would like to take a second here to thank Linda and all the listeners and watchers for being a part of the podcast. I appreciate you. I too resonate with all your takeaways, Linda. With each episode I work on, I gain new knowledge and a chance to work on myself. I'm so grateful for that. My favorite episode, well, all of them are my favorite, but if I have to pick one, it will be episode 44, Becoming a New Version of Yourself. Please let us know which is your favorite episode down below. And again, thanks for all your support. More amazing episodes are coming your way, so stay tuned. Bye, and thank you, Linda.
Thank you so much, Sarah. I love your kind words, and I love having you as my brilliant podcast manager. Okay, so let's talk about what Sarah and I actually do to create this podcast. So first of all, I mentioned already that I write a script. So for me, it works quite well that I write out a script for an episode. Either I want to get my thoughts straight, or I want to use, of course, the script as well later on for the blog content. So it's really handy for me. And I'm not the person who can just talk for 20, 30 minutes about a topic and get it all very straight and very coherent. So I want to do a good job, and that's why I create a script first. Then I'm recording it, as I do now. I'm recording it, of course, at the same time, the voice and the video all in one go. And I try to get better at it every time, and I try to improve technical things about it, like the light, the microphone, or the camera. So over the last year, I have upgraded certain things. And if you're really interested in that side of things, so the technology that we use, the equipment that we use, let me know in the comments or send me a DM or wherever else you see me or hear me, and let me know. And I'm happy to create an episode all about that as well. But let's move on from this part. So I'm recording, and once I record it, I upload all of the materials on a Google Drive to actually share it with Sarah so she can take over the next steps. And she is actually doing much more than me. So Sarah is doing all of the editing. She's cutting it all together. She's cutting out all of the mistakes that I make. And there are sometimes quite a few. So she's cutting all of that out, and she is producing an audio version of the podcast, and then as well the video version that you see on YouTube or on social media. And when she's ready with that, she plans a podcast to be published at the right time, always on Tuesdays every week. And she's creating as well a lot of the notes that go underneath a podcast episode. And then the next big chunk that she's doing is creating all of my social media around the podcast episode. She produces stories, she produces posts, and YouTube shorts and Pinterest pictures. So she literally takes the script and the transcript of the final episode, and she produces all of my social media content for the week. And that is quite a lot. But, if you're thinking about having a podcast, then that's what you can do as well. You literally don't have to come up anymore with any other topics, because your podcast and the topic and what you're talking about in your episode can fill the social media content of a whole week. And this is fantastic news if you're thinking about starting your own podcast. So that's what you do. And then we go live. We have as well a blog on the day the podcast episode is published. The blog is released, so you can actually read the whole episode as well and not just watch it or listen to it. And we're going to send out the newsletter. So if you're already on my email list, you get as well a newsletter informing you about the topic and sending you all the different links where you can watch it or listen to the podcast episode. So in a nutshell, that's what we do to run and create and publish this podcast. So I hope that was useful information for you. Okay, let's move on. Actually, before we move on, I forgot a very important part, actually the most important part. I said that I wouldn't want to talk about all the technology, the software, the equipment in this episode, but one thing I did want to talk about, and I just realized, was how are we making this all happen? Because Sarah, she sits in a completely different country than me. So how do we communicate? How can we be so efficient? So what we use is a program called Monday.com. You can actually find it online, but I have linked you as well in the show notes and underneath this video the link to check it out. And Monday.com is a project management system. It does a lot of other things, but we use it for our projects. We use it for our workflows. We use it for the whole podcast creation, but for so much more. Literally all of my data, all of my projects, all of launches, product creation, everything is on Monday.com. It is so versatile and flexible, but it has as well fantastic templates. So if you're looking for something and you want to start working on something, you can use one of their preset templates. But then you can change anything, literally all the columns, all the colors, all the functionalities, the data that you want to put in. You can create formulas, so similar to an Excel kind of feel. It's amazing. And when we go through the podcast creation, I do my parts first and I track it in our workflow. And once I've done all of my parts, I inform Sarah through a little message in Monday.com. And then she sees everything that I have done already. And she can even check in beforehand and see me literally ticking things off of my list. And then she can take over. And again, she can shoot it over to me once it is time to review the social media, or for me to check the newsletter if everything is okay. So all of that is managed through that fantastic system. And I can just advise you, if you're starting your own business, if you're starting your own podcast, if you want to be more efficient in your business in general and just have everything in one place, then check the link out underneath the video or in the show notes. And yeah, have a look if it's for you. I can just highly, highly recommend it. It has been a life and time saver. So now we're going to move on to the last section of this episode. And I wanted to share with you my 3 biggest mistakes that I have made over the last year. And why do I share my 3 biggest mistakes? Because I want you to learn from them. Maybe you are interested in creating your own podcast. Maybe you're not, and that's fine. But we always learn out of our mistakes. And even listening to these mistakes that I made in my podcast, it might actually make you think about something in your own work, in your own business, or in your own projects. So, mistake number 1 has been that I did not immediately create my own blog for my podcast. So with the platform that I use for the podcast, I had the possibility of just publishing the episodes on kind of their template of website. And that was very easy for me. So I didn't have to create immediately all of the blog posts and publish it on the website. Now that I've done all of the work, and Sarah and I had to do it all for the last kind of 45 episodes, I would have really liked myself doing it earlier and start straight away with my blog. It was a lot of work, and this kind of repetitive work where your brain just goes boof at the end of the day. So yeah, if you are thinking about something like that, just start with your blog straight away. You will want to have it at some point, so just create it immediately. Every episode that you create, already create as well the blog post with it, because if you do it later on, it's a lot of work at once, and it can make you go a little bit crazy in your mind. So that was my mistake number 1. Mistake number 2, I alluded to this one already, and I wouldn't say it's a mistake, it's just a learning that I want to share with you. And that is, if you're already thinking of producing a podcast and it is kind of in a similar format than this, where you want to connect it and for the podcast to help you create your brand and increase the visibility of your name and your business, then turn on the camera. Just do it straight away. As I mentioned, it helps you so much with creating your social media content. It helps you connect better with your audience if they can see your lovely face. So if you're thinking about creating a podcast, if you're creating any kind of content already, think about how can you expand it. If you're already creating it, how can you even make it better, more reusable? What else can you do with that time that you're already spending in creating it? So think about it. But for me, one of the biggest mistakes was that I didn't turn on the camera straight away because I wanted to stay in my comfort zone. I still needed these first 6 months to stay in that comfort zone of creating the podcast initially without the video. And I get that as well. I understand why I did it, but I'm glad as well that I'm now showing my face to you so you actually get to see me, and I have much better social media content from it as well. So that's number 2. Number 3 is just get started. Take this as a message, just get started. If you are thinking about creating something like a podcast or a vlog on YouTube or anything, just anything in your life that you're already thinking about it for, let's say, days, weeks, months, or even years, just get started. Especially with a podcast, it might sound like it's a lot of difficult and complicated work, but it isn't. It's actually very easy. And you can start with any kind of technology and equipment that you can actually get for free or you have already at home, like a mobile phone and a computer. It's really straightforward and actually that much easier than you might think to publish your first episode. So just get started. we dream of things and we envision ourselves doing things and we talk about it to friends and family, but then we just never take the next step of doing it. And I know, I get it. It means to step out of your comfort zone, and that is not the easiest things. So a book that really helped me with that is Brian Tracy, Eat the Frog. I have used some of his quotes before, so I will link it in the show notes or underneath the video. Check out that book. It's really helpful when you are somebody who procrastinates quite a bit, or you're pushing the harder or more uncomfortable tasks to another time of the day, to another day, to another month. It really helped me read that book. And sometimes when I catch myself actually procrastinating and pushing something that means for me to step out of my comfort zone, if I push it down the way, along the line, then I actually tell myself, eat that frog. Eat the frog. Come on, let's do it. So check out that book. It's really, really helpful. And I want to finish this episode with some great words from Dr. Joe Dispenza. You know, I love talking about him, but I'm just going to read you these words. And I want you, close your eyes and listen to my voice and really take in the words as if they are just for you. You are greater than you think, more powerful than you know, and more unlimited than you could ever dream. Isn't this beautiful? So, go for it, do it, get started. That's my message. I am so grateful that I did it 1 year ago. You know, there is this saying that 1 year from now, you would have wished that you started today. This is so true with everything in our lives. So just do it. Just go for it. Start today. Thank you so much for listening and watching. It has been a pleasure to talk about my podcast. And yes, let's celebrate it again. 1 year it has been. Thank you so much for being here with me, for being a part of my journey. And I love you so very much. Thank you and bye-bye.